Let's look at a fairly practical application of using dynamics. I'm going to create a grass skirt effect. Now what I have here, I have an actual sphere and a bunch of 2-point polygon strings in kind of a lampshade configuration. Let's pop into Modeler, and I'll tell you a secret. We're going to be applying Sas Lite to this object in just a moment. Now the important thing about Sas Lite, and this is where most people kind of get confused, when you're using long chains with Sasquatch, you need to name the end polygon something different so it knows where to start. In this case, I've called it base, B-A-S-E, and that it doesn't need to be named anything in particular. It just needs to be different from the rest of it. And to create this chain of long chain polygons, I wanted something that kind of draped over the ball but didn't really apply the dynamics. I just wanted to have it biased first. So I just created a box and used my arrow key to make a bunch of segments. Turned it off, grab here, and now I have a chain of 2-point polygons. I need to go in, select that one, rename it, and a lot of people name it root, and you're not going to even see this chain later on. It's just being used as a base for the polygons. Now to get the shape, I could have pre-bent it, and I decided just to tilt it. And I used my clone tool under multiply, and about 100, and a rotation. Let's see, that'd be 3.6. Okay. Basically, I did something like that. So I'm going to delete this and just go back to the one I was originally working with, which is here. And let's jump back to to layout. So here we have our object. We need to have the skirt layer parented to the ball layer, because the ball is going to be my collision object. So I'm just going to grab it here. I just chose a ball object because it's simple. If this was an actual grass skirt, I might have something that more closely resembled, hips or whatever. But we'll start with this. The ball, I'm going to create an animation of it just moving around, rotating some. And then settling back. So now I want to apply some dynamics to it. I'm also going to want to nail down the end. I want to fix the end. So a number of things I need to do. I need to apply dynamics to the grass skirt so that it moves around. I need to tell the ball to be a collision object and make sure everything works together. So let's start with the ball. This is pretty easy. I just have the ball selected and just tell it to be collision, and we're just going to leave it at that. Nothing will happen yet because there's nothing applied to anything else. So let's go and under grass skirt select cloth, and under cloth we want to fix the ends, and this is handy because we have base as the very first polygon, and we'll use that to fix it. Or we could use the very first point. I created a point set for the ends. But let's just go with base, and let's see where that gets us. So we're pretty close. It's not paying attention to my collision object so much, so we need to fix that. So we will open up the grass skirt, cloth dynamics, under collision, collision detect. We will just select all. Let's calculate that and see how that works. You can see already it's working. It's a little bit too extreme, even for a grass skirt, but we can see that we are in the ballpark. A couple of things we need to do. We need to settle down some of that stretching. We also should add some gravity to our scene so that the grass falls down. Let's do gravity first. -4, just pulling a number out of thin air. And let's say it looks more like silk. And we're actually pretty close here. Let's go to our camera view. Still a little extreme, but rather than spend all the time tweaking those settings, there is a pre-made scene which we'll pull up in just a second. Now, applying Sasquatch. Now, this is a grass skirt. This works equally well if you're working with hair, applying cloth dynamics so you get realistic hair. Very common. You probably want to build some kind of object that has like a nose or a face or something that will clear. But the concepts are all the same. This is just simplified for clarity. So we're going to go in and we're going to apply Sasquatch. In this case, it'll be Sasquatch Lite because that is what is included with Lightwave. The important thing to remember about Sasquatch Lite, it needs to be applied in two places. Two places it needs to be applied. It needs to be applied under the property, under Deform. We have Sas Lite. It also needs to be applied. In Image Properties, not Image Editor. So open up the Effects panel. Under Processing, we will find Sas Lite. As long as we're here, I'm going to change my background to just the gradient, and you'll see in a minute it'll just make it easier to see once we render it. We're still not going to see anything because we haven't adjusted our settings properly yet. So we're going to go back to our object under Sas Lite, and we're going to tell it to make long hair using guide chains. Now, guide chain is a string of 2-point polygons. This is where it gets confusing. Surface names. Surface name means where the hair or fur will be applied. If I jump out here for a moment, take a look at my surface editor. I have my ball surface, the base, which is that very first polygon, and one labeled hair. Hair is the one I want. Also, watch your capitalization because it is case sensitive. So it's hair. Go back in, load this up, type in hair. So these are the only two settings I'm changing. I'm telling it to make long hair using guide chains and typing in the name of the polygons where the hair is supposed to be applied. Now we will render this, and in just a moment, surprisingly quickly, look at that, we have hair. Now see how it's thick on the end and tapering off? The reason for that is because we have this one polygon named base and the rest is hair. That is telling Sasquatch how to apply the hair. Now this is not a tutorial on how to use Sasquatch, but just how to use it in conjunction with using these long chains because it's connected. I always put my density up to as far as it'll go, and if that's not enough, I'll do a copy and paste and put two layers on here with slightly different settings, and I'll render that, and that's a way of getting more thickness to the hair. As you can see, a whole lot of thickness here. And and look how hairy that looks. And we wanted more of a green grass in this case. However, when this is rendered out, the guide chains are following along. As you can see, here's our guide chains. They're still visible. The Sasquatch is following along with that deformation. A few things we want to do. Let's take one of these off so we can see underneath. When we render this out, we're still seeing that ball object. We need that to work as a collision object, but that may not be what we want in our final render. So I'm going to select the ball object, go into my render properties. Actually, it's just object properties under render, and I'm going to tell it unseen by camera. I probably don't want it to be involved in any shadow calculations either, and probably not even seen by rays, so it won't be seen in reflection. So now when I render this, the ball object is gone. There it is, but I told it basically remove it from the scene. However, it's still there in the calculation. There is another way of doing this in the scene editor. If you click this, it effectively removes that layout item from any of the calculations as far as rendering is concerned. It's still in there, it's still an object property, but it's a one-click way to take everything out. Very handy. It's been in Lightwave for a while. Now we still are seeing our original strands, our 2-point polygons. We want to get rid of those as well. So we're simply going to click unseen by camera as well, and that's just affecting the geometry, the underlying geometry. If I re-render this, our Sasquatch is still rendering, but we're not seeing those underlying lines. We're also not seeing the collision object underneath. So I'm going to load up a previously made scene, which is on the CD, which is called Grass Skirt. I have performed the calculation on this example scene. In this scene, I've spent a little more time adjusting the properties of the cloth and the collision, and I've got a pretty nice effect going on here. And also, I've adjusted my Sasquatch so it has a greener tint and a little more thickness to it to get something closer to a grass skirt. Now this looks a little bit fuzzy, and the reason is it's got motion blur turned on. Now just a final quick tip on using Sasquatch. Remember, when you apply Sasquatch, it needs to be applied in two places. It needs to be applied under Object Properties, under Deformed. It seems a little odd to me too, because it's not really deforming the object. But that's where it is. I've just made my color green. Now to get motion blur out of something rendered in Sasquatch, you need to open up your Image Processing tab, open up your Sasquatch Lite panel, and turn off the one-pass anti-aliasing mode. One-pass anti-aliasing means that it will render, Sasquatch will render once, and it'll be pretty quickly, and it'll look good, and you can tell what level you want it to anti-alias, but it only does the math once. If you turn that off, it will re-render Sasquatch on every anti-aliasing pass, and that's how you get your motion blur. There's a few more settings, but we'll leave that for another tutorial disc to use Sasquatch. Another way to thicken this up is I have a grass skirt here. I'm just going to clone it. going to clone the object, select my grass skirt, clone current item, because it does pretty much everything I want. I'm going to go in and just rotate it just a little bit so it's a little offset from the original one. I'll have to recalculate everything, but that's okay. It doesn't take terribly long. It'll give me twice as many fibers very quickly because it was looking a little bit thin. I could also go in and add another layer of Sasquatch, but that just thickens up the ones that are already there. By cloning it, I get a whole new set and slightly different calculations because it's offset and thicker. And this is just something you do on a per job basis and actually a per shot basis. So load up the scene, take a look at how the settings are applied and tweaked. This is also has a sample that's fully rendered in the samples disk. And there we are. And if we render that, we will see this scene also has some shadow casting turned on. So the Sasquatch, see how it's doing each pass individually? These are shadows from Sasquatch. So the Sasquatch fur can cast shadows onto objects. And we have our final scene. It looks kind of blurry and soft, but that's because it has motion blur in it. And just like anything else with Lightwave, if you want smoother motion blur, it's going to cost you more passes. Also, you should be aware that Sasquatch does not play well with other plugins because it's a post-process. You can use Xdoff, which is an excellent tool. However, you cannot use Worley's own F Prime, which is very frustrating. But we're going to get all that figured out someday. So right now, this is a practical application of using two-point polygons with cloth dynamics, with collision, and with Sasquatch.